So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and actually to another one of these kind of lopsided free-for-alls. We wait for a while for one to come along and then two come along in fairly quick succession, only this time it's kind of the opposite to the one that happened last time where there were 3 teams of 2 and 1 team of 1. This time there are 3 teams of 1 and 1 team of 2, and also rather fortuitously for how it has panned out really, the team of 2 will start off mostly within this very large but quite spaced out cityscape settlement, and the other 3 will have to make their way through the wide open spaces to engage them. Now this is a long battle, but I would imagine there's going to be a fairly long transitional phase at the start of this one, purely because all the armies start off fairly well separated. There's probably going to be a fairly lengthy cut before we actually get into the battle at hand. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit nervous about this one as well, because it's kind of similar to what I said about the Mistrand map, which did go off without a hitch somewhat recently, but this does put me a little bit in mind of the old version of Pelagia that was in Third Age Reforged once upon a time, and it was horrendously unstable for me, even back when my PC was relatively speaking a lot newer. But yeah, it's not exactly the same map, but it does have the same look to it in the sense that it's a very large ring settlement with these cliff-like walls on the outside. I mean, I don't know who made this settlement. It's rather interesting, but it is almost certainly designed to be almost an arena within the settlement, more so than something that's actually defended by armies, because it's far too big for even a team of 4 really to defend it well. So yeah, I imagine this is really the intended use of this map, and it was built from the ground up for such a thing, but still rather interesting. The name of the map apparently is Rochdale, which that is actually a real town in England, but enough of my waffling. We shall now go through what I will term as technically the three attacking armies really. There isn't anything special rules-wise about capturing the settlement or killing generals or anything, at least as far as I'm aware. It really is just a classic free-for-all only. The layout is what it is, and we shall start off with Diego Rio Ramos, who is playing as Lothlorien over here. Didn't work out for them in the last free-for-all we saw, but Froggy was on his own on that occasion, whereas that isn't a distinction which Diego has to himself this time around. Be very interested to see how Lothlorien play this out, because they do have units that can hide. Elven quality in the late game can be a real problem, but if they do attract the attention of all the other teams, their lower numbers could prove to be a real problem when it comes to getting overwhelmed within the settlement streets. Marchwarns of the Wood, decent unit of archers that can be used freely fairly early on. Their poison arrows can also be used to break up some of the defending positions that other players may want to take up. Elven damage at range, of course, is very well documented, and Lothlorien's in particular. Going for some Spears of the Wood just in behind here, as well as some Blades of the Wood. So the lighter Spears and Swordsmen, I mean, relative to their abilities in melee, they're actually a very efficient unit, but they are, of course, very lightweight, so when it comes to being hit by ranged attacks, they aren't the best in that regard. So being traditional line infantry and standard Spears, maybe they're not quite up to the same standard as certain other units are, but they are relatively cheap. They allow you to pad out your army a little bit, and for a unit that in melee will punch above its weight ultimately. Just be aware of their weaknesses. A catapult, which in a settlement battle like this can be really useful if things get bogged down in the streets, which they very often can in this kind of map. A piece of artillery can be very, very handy. The only slight drawback to this is that they're relatively slow. They mean that your army has to be a little bit more static, and if the other players do not have an artillery piece, it makes you more of a target because they'll see it as a real threat, and rightly so, which in a free-for-all, feigning weakness can be very often the way to victory, as we have often seen. Loreland Axemen here in high numbers. Now this is more of a standard line infantry unit in terms of they are significantly bulkier in terms of their armour. They're also going to be much better in melee, both at dealing damage and just all round. They're much more expensive, of course, but if it does come down to brass tacks in melee against similar kinds of units, there's relatively few units of line infantry that can outright defeat the Loreland Axemen. And as if that wasn't enough, they've also got the heavy Axemen of Lothlorien over here, the Loreland Warriors, which will offer the armour piercing, which will be useful against more than one faction on the field today. And that elven quality, of course. Lothlorien, the only faction to have a dedicated unit of heavy axemen among the elves. Mirkwood do have them, but they're as a part of hybrid units, so it offers them an armour-piercing spike, which the other elven factions do not have. Lorien's damage in melee, a very well-documented part of them as well. Another unit of Spears of the Wood back there. 2 units of Loreland Archers, a heavier unit of archers than the March Wardens in front of them. There's a very real range presence to this Lothlorien army, with also the 2 bodyguard units. Big investment, but the Watchers of the Golden Wood and the Kindred of Celeborn can be a real concern for those that are fighting them. So between the artillery, the 4 units of standard archers and the 2 units of bodyguard archers, Lorien are clearly going to try and shoot their enemies mostly to death and then finish them off later on. We'll see if that works, because they may very well be perceived as the biggest threat with the artillery and all the archers, and they don't necessarily have the infantry to cover all of them. Now, we move on to Dol Amroth, and perhaps rather predictably they have brought some cavalry, being one of Dol Amroth's strengths. The Knights of the Silver Swan, if they can find the space to manoeuvre within this settlement, which is actually going to be fairly easy, well, easier than it would be in a normal cityscape because of the room that is within the settlement, so they may very well be able to find the space to get some good charges off. The Knights of the Silver Swan, not a multiple HP unit of cavalry, of course, so they are going to be more difficult for Major Sharp here to use in the current version of the game, but they still do have a good charge on them, and especially against some of those smaller elven units, they can end up racking up a lot of value very, very quickly. Of course, being that he is Major Sharp, shooting is going to be one of his primary strengths, I would assume, and the Tirithea marksmen do offer Dol Amroth a good skirmish archer to stand and shoot with, heavy armour, reasonable damage values as well for a more expensive unit like they are. Unlike their Gondorian cousins, they're not quite as good in melee because they only have a side sword rather than a long sword. But even so, still a useful unit to have, and he's got 3 units of them as well, so this is a fairly bulky skirmish force as well. Not as good as the one Lothlorien have brought to the field, but even still a potential problem that the other factions are going to have to try and deal with. Doranernal pikemen, standard units of them. I mean, if you can bring pikes, it does pay off, because if you can keep them alive until the late game, they can be real match winners. Even basic pikes such as this can be a problem, although if they're committed too early in a battle such as this, where I imagine skirmish power is going to be a big determining factor in who goes on to win, they could end up getting shredded relatively easily. Athalond halberdiers are here, some Athalond men-at-arms as well, so the line infantry and the armour-piercing phalanx as well. They have a catapult too, so again, more of a threat. Could be seeing some artillery duels as well as catapults trying to do damage to defensive positions. Another unit of Athalond men-at-arms back here, in fact another 2 units by the looks of things. And no bodyguard tier infantry for Dol Amroth, going very much for a balanced approach on foot between their ranged units and their melee units, with a little bit more of an emphasis on their ranged units, I suppose, with their archers and cavalry. Archers and artillery, I should say, but cavalry is where they're focusing here. 2 units of standard lancers and then their multiple HP bodyguard tier melee knights. The Haven Knights are incredibly tanky, of course. Last time out, we did see them utilise the Arathurium to very good effect, and that's ultimately what led to them winning the last fight we saw Dol Amroth be a part of. Be a little bit more difficult within a settlement such as this, but you could argue that the valley system last time was just as constricting, considering the surprising amount of room that's in here. Now we have the Womb Raider, who sent me this battle replay, so big thank you to him. He is playing as Isengard, so the Dunlending clansmen will be useful for warding off any cavalry strikes from Dol Amroth, but of course other than that they will be utilised as fodder. Uruk-hai Reavers offer them a cheap and cheerful armour-piercing unit, which will be useful against a lot of factions on the field today. Some Snaga skirmishers as well, much the same thing, but at range. Some units being sequestered away up here, important units of Uruk-hai crossmen, 3 units of them, unlike the archer-centric factions we've already, or archer-centric armies we've already seen, albeit in differing ways from Dol Amroth and Lothlorien. Isengard, of course, will bring their crossbows to bear, which, again, they're one of those tools which in the late game can be really devastating. Isengard in general can be a real problem in the late game for other people to deal with if you haven't done enough damage to them, both from their crossbows and from this unit here, the Uruk-hai pikemen. Certainly they have the beating of the Doranernal pikes we've already seen. We have Half-Orc Spearguard, we have the mighty Narskai, a hugely damaging unit of arm-piercing bodyguard infantry. Brought the Isengard Ballista as well, so all of the quote-unquote attacking factions today have got some artillery that they can bring to bear. The Isengard Ballista, however, sort of combines the damage potential of a catapult with the reliability of the ballista, so they may have the slight edge here. This may also cause Isengard to become a bit of a target, especially seeing as they will have a little bit more of a difficult time skirmishing with the enemy, being that they're reliant on crossbows. Half-Orc Spearguard, plenty of Uruk-hai infantry to make up the spine of their army, more general purpose units for within the settlement. They do have the Champions of the White Hand here as well, which are an exceptional unit of cavalry killers. Dol Amroth with all of their cavalry combined would still be too much for the Champions of the White Hand, but they won't want to get isolated, even with the Haven Knights, because that's a fight that neither of the 2 factions would particularly want, but Dol Amroth are more reliant on their cavalry to come out on top of that engagement, which they wouldn't necessarily. More Dunlendings and more Snaga, and finally, as we head towards the docks, we have the Team of 2, which is a rather strange alliance, admittedly. I guess Cardolan have been subjugated, I should say, by Angmar. DF Mark playing as them in a rather large blob. Barrow Whites, which will be good for clogging up the city streets. There's 2 units of them. Plenty of Angmar halberds. There's the Witch Realm Scourge Raiders in there as well for those throwing axes. There's Angmar Marauders. I know for a fact there's also Witch Realm Pikemen in there, because you can see the pikes even if you can't easily see them. Interesting kind of army, I suppose. I mean, they're not going to have the same sort of funds to play with as the attacking armies are, because they're going to have to spread it out between themselves. So it's a fairly numerous Angmar army, actually. So they haven't gone for the trap, in my opinion, that would be going for all of Angmar's high tier units, because then you would be really exposed if you just went for Witch Realm Blackguard, Hammerguard and Witchers. So I think they have ultimately done the right thing, and they're going to be fighting alongside Long Chong's Cardolan army with Greenway Garrison Spearmen and Pikes, shored up by the Wardens of Tirn Gorthad, backed up by some civilians. I mean, Hiriath Archers, plenty of crossbows, which, especially when you're defending in a situation like this, could be exceptionally useful. If the attackers don't decide to destroy these two defending armies first, then late game crossbows, again, in much the same way that they are for Isengard, could be a real problem for the attackers to deal with when it comes to trying to root out Cardolan. And Cardolan have gone for more bodyguard units, but that's okay given the synergy that is between the two defending armies here. Tharbad Warhammers and 2 units, by the looks of things, of Dunedain Captains, so plenty of heavy swordsmen and some armour-piercing shock infantry as well. So, pretty nasty Cardolan army this, but obviously it's not massive because they have to cut corners somewhere. So too to Angmar, but teamwork is going to be key here. But based on their compositions, they have every chance of winning this. I do imagine, however, that the attackers are going to prioritise at least making some gains against them first and foremost. So the bodyguard's going to try and get up onto the walls actually near the harbour over here. But as I mentioned, we will be making a bit of a cut because there is quite a big distance between the attacking armies, and I'd imagine there's going to be a little bit of a gap between now and when the battle actually gets started. So I'll make a cut, and we'll rejoin when the battle is getting underway. So I think we're going to rejoin here, as it looks like the Isengard Ballista is indeed going to start firing, and the defenders in this particular situation are now very much constricted on all sides. There's been a little bit of catapult action from Lothlorien as well. We're going to start to see the battle really kick into gear now, with these Witch Realm pikemen taking a pretty substantial amount of damage. Honestly, using the ballista on something like the Barrow Wights might not be the worst idea, because they could prove to be a bit of a pain in melee if you do not deal with them in some faster manner than that. Knights of the Silver Swan are moving forward. Meanwhile, you can also see over here Lothlorien are getting involved with shooting at one of their fellow attacking armies in Dol Amroth fairly quickly. I mean, Dol Amroth may as well charge into these Cardolan civilians, to be honest with you. The civilians are not going to hold up well to a charge from Dol Amroth's heavy horsemen, but that wasn't a charge. They just bumped into melee, pulling out their swords and not getting up to charge speed. I mean, they're still going to kill civilians, but even so, it's a good opportunity to kill this unit essentially for free if Cardolan don't want to get involved with trying to counteract that cavalry in any way. Meanwhile, some of those pikes immediately getting shot up by Lothlorien as well, who may find themselves on the outside of this wall here if Dol Amroth decide to move in first. But of course, biding your time and waiting for later is actually the way that you want to be doing things in a free-for-all, so if they can get away with doing that, then they will, although I doubt you're going to be coaxing Dol Amroth into attacking instead of you if you continue to attack them, so there is that to consider as well. The Knights of the Silver Swan do indeed charge in, but they need to be very, very careful here with the Greenway Garrison Spearmen and Footmen on station, and yeah, that didn't go very well for the Knights of the Silver Swan there. Major Sharp, not seen him in a replay before, he may be a slightly newer player, and if that's the case, he has learned a most painful lesson there with the pikes immediately decimating one of his units of cavalry, and they are going to have to move backwards pretty quickly. Meanwhile, over here we are also seeing some charges, and with the pikes now no longer there as a result of the ballista fire, the champions of the White Hand charging in and doing some pretty substantial damage to this unit of Cardolan civilians. Nothing too surprising there. Meanwhile, both Lothlorien and Dol Amroth starting to bombard this position. Lothlorien having to go over the wall, so banking their shots. There are a few piles of corpses over here, which I believe, once again, like some Cardolan crossbows in there, as well as some Witch Realm pikemen. Angmar halberdiers also taking some damage. So this is a bit of a, I mean, it is a bit of a conundrum really for the defenders in this particular situation, because they don't really have much of a choice but to sit there and take this kind of punishment, because they cannot attack forwards into any one artillery piece, because they'll be leaving themselves horrendously open to attack from another angle from one of the other attacking armies, so they just have to hope that they aren't completely destroyed and that the attackers will turn on one another before they take too many losses. Snaga Stalkers And Angmar halberds taking a lot of damage at the hands of these Snaga skirmishers. And why not? The Snaga skirmishers are so cheap that if they are able to deal substantial damage to these two units, even if they are lower quality in nature, it will still be good value for money that Isengard are getting here, and Angmar potentially in a little bit of trouble. Once again, they can't really afford to attack forwards. The Lothlorien trackers are going to try and counter skirmish, and they will manage that at the very least. The Snaga skirmishers are not going to stand up too well to any sustained arrow fire from that perspective. Uruk-hai Reavers potentially going to move forwards. Get a bit of armour piercing damage done. This Dol Amroth catapult continuing to land some hits. Nothing overly problematic so far, but this is all really adding up from the defenders. Tirithea marksmen also shooting into this particular front line. While the march ones of the wood shooting out. Yeah, they're going after Dol Amroth, so Dol Amroth need to be maybe a little bit more savvy with what they're doing here and not focus so much on the defenders, because Isengard are going to be attacking them anyway, and instead try and do this sort of thing. I mean, Knights of the Silver Swan, the problem is as soon as the Spears of the Wood start to attack the Knights of the Silver Swan in melee, they're going to have losses sustained as well. Off the charge though, not too bad. Pikes crossing open ground in full view of elven archers. Not necessarily the best of ideas. Woundway Garrison footmen revealing themselves again, clumsily bumping into these spears. This is surely going to be the end of this unit of Knights of the Silver Swan at this point, I would assume. Those poison arrows are also certainly not going to be helping the mental resilience of the Dol Amroth warriors there. Major Sharp, I mean, sending forward a single unit of pikes. In a free-for-all, it's not quite the damning thing it could be in a more standard fight, but still, gotta be careful. Meanwhile, Isengard are moving forward now. The Goblin Band engaging with the Half-Orc Spear Guard. That first line of defence that they had laid on has been soundly defeated, really, by Isengard. Unit 9 captains are moving forward from Cardolan. I mean, that's a fairly substantial committal there, so Isengard, they need to be a little bit more careful with their ballista than that. They're going to go through the backs of their own men if they try and use it at close range like this. Doing a lot of damage there to the Minhiriath sharpshooters, but Isengard in attacking like this, they are going to attract the attention of more and more of the defenders' strengths. And in so doing, they may actually be undermining themselves and giving more of an advantage to Dol Amroth and Lothlorien. I'll have to wait and see on that. But Dunlending clansmen moving forward to back up the Uruk-hai infantry and Uruk-hai Reavers that are already on this front line. More and more Cardolan reinforcements moving forward to block Isengard's advance. Some Dunlending clansmen over here as more ballista bolts rip through the air. Champions the White Hand ready to move forward when necessary, moving through that building there, interestingly, the Dunlending clansmen. I mean, they're trying to go around, I suppose, the Pikes and Barrow-wights are still here, but I mean the Barrow-wights are surely going to cause panic in the ranks of a unit as lowly as the clansmen. Unit of civilians moving in as well, just for the sake of numbers. Much more of a traditional line battle this now between Isengard and the Cardolan-Angmar alliance that is on the defence. Snaga skirmishers getting into melee now. Plenty of archers also shooting into Isengard. Crossbows would be something that worries them as well. A bit of a fortuitous hit there into the side of that unit of halberds from the Dol Amroth catapult. Snaga skirmishers are routing. Like, yeah, this is I think the right move from Dol Amroth, because Lothlorien could very comfortably sit outside of the settlement like this until the end of the battle if Dol Amroth attacked directly into Angmar and Cardolan, whereas Dol Amroth could instead move to force Lothlorien's hand. Now in terms of pure melee like this without any sort of melee backup, I don't really fancy Dol Amroth's chances against the superior quality of the elven units, but let's not forget, in that composition phase it was very clear that Lothlorien were going for more of a ranged focus anyway. The other unit of Knights of the Silver Swan meanwhile getting a partial charge by the looks of things on those Lothlorien trackers as they now scurry back behind the spear and pike line. Now then, Barrow-wights, they will really get in the way of this Isengard assault, but will they on their own, with just some civilian cannon fodder as backup, be enough to completely stop the Isengard advance in its tracks? Certainly the two more heavy-duty Orcish factions in Angmar and Isengard, a little bit less reliant on numbers than Mordor and the Misty Mountains are. But Isengard are a singular army, much more able to bring what they want to, but Scourge Raiders? The Scourge Raiders shooting into the Uruk-hai pikemen is exactly what you want to see, to be honest. Well, here are Dol Amroth. I mean, these crossbows are completely exposed. Is Major Sharp going to charge into them, I wonder? I mean, if he doesn't, the Isengard crossbows might be very, very tempted to shoot their cavalry down mercilessly, and they are. If he'd have got into melee there, he would have actually stopped them from reloading. But unfortunately for him, he is going to pay the price for this cavalry. Maybe he just wanted to back up so he could actually get a charge off, but kind of missed the boat on that, unfortunately for him. He does manage to get the charge eventually, but when only 8 of his riders remain to tell the tale, and they're breaking. More ballista bolts hitting these units in the backfield. They're doing a lot of damage to the halberds and pikes. And densely packed. Really, the Isengard ballista getting a chance to show off what it's all about. Scourge Raiders moving back. This front line, I mean, the Nazkai are here now, but a combination of those higher quality Cardolan swordsmen as well as those pikes that they have as well, proving to be a little bit more of a problem for Isengard to bust their way through than maybe they were expecting. Scourge Raiders, Sauron Gatekeepers, shooting into the backfield. The Uruk-hai crossbows are taking a lot of damage as well. Like I said, Isengard, while they are, I would imagine they are going to turn Angmar and Cardolan back at some stage, but I'm not sure it's going to be worthwhile from them. So far, if I were a player on the field, I would be most happy if I were Lothlorien. I haven't taken too much punishment at the hands of Dol Amroth. Dol Amroth themselves have taken some losses, and Isengard and the defenders are knocking 7 bells out of one another. So things ultimately looking pretty good for the elves, especially if you can marshal some of the ammunition you have in the late game. You can post up in a good defensive position, and things would start to look pretty rosy for you. I do wonder if the other players on the field will realise this before it is too late. Elven quality in the late game as well. Could prove to be too much for them to bear. Dol Amroth starting to shift forward, civilians continuing to rout. While in here, Witchround Blackguard and... what's going on here? Oh, I see, there is a passageway through here, these little alleyways, most interesting. So, Dol Amroth, yeah, they're attacking into Cardolan and Angmar though, which is the problem. I mean, ultimately Cardolan and Angmar as well, with the quality they have in here, all of these units are bodyguard units, and they're going up against nothing but basic Dol Amrothian infantry. It's going to go pretty poorly for them, and Dol Amroth need to consider their resource management here before their army ends up being cut down. Meanwhile, this Isengard ballista ripping through the ranks here of this defence. Some orc fellas moving in to try and shore things up, but surely that's not going to be enough. Far too fragile. Units are going to be able to get in behind the line of, well, this line over here, which was by far the most solid point that the defenders had at their disposal so far in this battle. Champions of the White Hand able to find a gap as well, charging into this part of the line, which at this point is only guarded by some tattered remnants of Gwathlo trackers and Goblin Burn. And here we have sharpshooters. I mean, crossbows are a good way of dealing with a unit like that, but I mean, I really can't help but feel like it's too little too late. At the very least though, those Champions of the White Hand will not be around for Isengard to use in the late game. And that could be enough to prevent their foes from winning it. Uruk-hai crossbowmen, Angmar marauders running for the hills. Athorc Spearguard are shaken, but at the very least they can prevent these gatekeepers from continuing to use their crossbows. I don't know how long they'll necessarily last in melee against a unit of this quality. Witchround pikemen rolling forwards, trying to help salvage some sort of situation. I mean, the Isengard ballista is going to have racked up a very impressive kill count for itself. Managed to get some pretty good and decisive hits on their foes. Dol Amroth also managing to push their way through here, getting around those bodyguard units to a certain extent, although considering the fact that you can phase through some of these buildings without having to use the gaps, that is probably making things a little bit more difficult for the defenders in terms of trying to cover their angles, but I wouldn't worry too much about all that, because I don't think Dol Amroth are going to be able to make this assault stick, and even if they do, they're going to run into Isengard's advancing forces pretty quickly as well. Some Snaga archers getting in from behind, and that is enough to rout this unit of Athalon down at men at arms. What is going on in here? I mean, to be fair though, using little areas, nooks and crannies like this might be the best way to sequester some of your units away and force the attackers into killing off one another. Lothlorien are moving forward now, and with some Loren warriors in here, that will easily be enough to kill off this unit of exposed Tirithea marksmen. Interestingly, I do appreciate the fact actually that Lorien are moving forward and actually going onto the offensive somewhat, because it would have been in their best interest really to allow Dol Amroth to continue to waste their manpower and attack a little bit later when victory was maybe a bit more assured, but also going after some softer targets in the Angmar halberdiers. Gatekeeper's position has been reasserted. There are still some Tharbad warhammers in there. I am surprised actually that there is still something resembling a front line over here from Cardolan and Angmar that is holding Isengard's advance at bay. I mean, Lothlorien shooting over the walls, I mean, the good thing about this is they'll either hit the defenders or they will hit bits and pieces of the Isengard. I mean, that's actually enough to rout them, so they're doing the defenders a bit of a favour there, whether intentionally or no. And Isengard actually, as a result, have been turned back. And this is what I was kind of worried about. I mean, throwing themselves against the defending position, the defenders kind of had to respond to this with extreme force. And as a result, we have this. Isengard actually losing out here. And now, what do? I mean, Isengard are retreating. They don't have much left, but if they can sequester themselves away at a safe distance, they may yet have a part to play in the late game. And that may be the idea all along. Maybe they never intended to win this fight and instead just put themselves in a weakened enough position so that no one pays them any heed until it's too late. It's a risky thing to do, because the defenders could very well chase them down and try and kill them off now, but maybe they can't do that now that the elves are making themselves more of a threat on this front line over here, and they will instead have to commit more and more of their resources towards stopping Diego's advance instead. So far it's only the light infantry that we see, the 3 units of Blades of the Wood, which are still going to be better than the Greenway units, and they're going to be entirely reliant on the Cardolan pikes to keep this elven light infantry at bay. Only time will tell. March Ones of the Wood continuing to shoot into the backfield, trying to go after the Angmar halberds. Stray shots will hit the Barrow-wights, not necessarily get any kills, but still. And I mean, Dol Amroth are now also largely on the retreat. Don't know how much ammunition this Dol Amroth catapult still had, but regardless, it is going to get butchered by this unit of Loren warriors in melee. Unfortunate for them. Yeah, you can very clearly tell that Dol Amroth is a newer player because they're not responding to these sorts of threats in a particularly cohesive manner, but that doesn't matter so much because there's still the opportunities here. And again, seeing Wanderers of Nivredal caught out in melee as well is a bit of a tragedy, but there's still the opportunities, especially if you have a unit like the Haven Knights alive and healthy in the late game. It can be the sort of thing which is very difficult to stop, so even the relative inexperience of this player could yet prove to not be a decisive factor in the game, but we'll have to wait and see. So far I would still be fancying my chances if I were Lothlorien. Heavier archers now getting in position as well to continue to shoot their shots into these defending positions. Loren warriors meanwhile breaking through the side of this front line. I mean, they are being made to pay for it. Crossbow bolts are finding their way into the elves. But this front line surely is not going to last all that much longer. I mean, the Cardolan morale is holding up for now, but how much longer will that be the case for? One of the elves, more than one of the elves actually, has found its way through the line, which is surely going to cause problems for the pike's cohesion. Well, what will Isengard do? The ballista has been long since abandoned. Uruk-hai crossbowmen trying to shoot at the Witchhound pikemen as they move back. So it didn't go all that well for Isengard there. Like I said, could that prove to be intentional? Angmar halberds posting themselves up over here. Bodyguard units still hiding themselves away within the buildings. I I'm sure that ruse won't last for long, but it'll give them a little bit of cover, I suppose. Elven Catapult getting a little bit closer, already using quite a lot of his ammunition, so I do wonder how much ammunition the Elven Artillery truly has left. Well, the Elves, yeah, well and truly demolishing that front line now. More arrows zipping back and forth. I think that's pretty much the only engagement that's happening at this point in the battle. I mean, Dol Amroth have pulled back as a result of the losses they've taken at the hands of both the defenders and the elves. Isengard, of course, have to hang back for the time being because their army is so depleted. So, really, the only event is the elven attack into the defenders' territory. And it's down this one street, really, supported by the Lothlorien archers in behind. A unit of Lothlorien warriors surrounded by the lighter blades of the wood. This front line is maybe a little bit more substantial with the Barrow Wights and the Gatekeepers getting involved in melee. Seeing the special projectiles now making their first foray into the battle. Kindred of Caliborn with some initial shots, but they're raining down from very, very high, so they're not really going to be all that efficient. Still have units back there and maybe making them go past into that territory and continuing to hide in that building complex over there is the plan. Or Elven Artillery, I think they were going for those Minhiriath archers that were in a line. I mean, a grazing shot, but that may be all that's required. They've already done a fair amount of damage with their artillery already. It may have already proven to be a worthwhile inclusion. Anything from here could be considered a bonus. Lothlorien archers out of ammunition now and getting onto the front line to join this Elven assault. So far seems finely poised, finely balanced. Arrows again just drifting in from on high. They're not going to be terribly effective like that, but it's better than nothing. More of those Kindred of Caliborn projectiles trying to finish off what remains of that very depleted unit of Minhiriath sharpshooters. I don't believe there's anything in here still, no. The flickering of that wall is really quite off-putting. I mean, surely... I don't know though, because they do have plenty of phalanx units over here. Solid upper end units as well, like the Gatekeepers. Of course, the Barrow Wights are real tar pit. Even the elves with their damage are not going to be dealing with them in a lightning fast manner. Archers moving in to maybe try and hide themselves away. They can't hide too much in there, however, otherwise it will be very clear what they're trying to do, just trying to put themselves into the positions where they may not be noticed. If there are other building complexes they can use for that, then they should, but I don't think there are. I think these actually do have fences. You can see them poking out from the ground, so it is interesting. This is maybe the one area where that isn't the case. And they are actually getting into a good position to shoot along the side of the Elven lines, and this is where the lighter armour of the Blades of the Wood is really going to be a bit of a problem. And of course the Lothlorien warriors don't have any shield value either, so a bit of a problem this, and the Elven attack doesn't look like it's going anywhere as such. Meanwhile, what's going on here? Some Haven Knights loitering. Nearby, of course, is the remainder of the Isengard army, who are maybe thinking about taking their chances once again. I would still wait a little bit longer before the elves are a little bit more depleted than that. Meanwhile, Dol Amroth also started to make their way into the positions where Isengard were attacking before as well. Maybe going to try and start skirmishing a little bit with their Tirithea marksmen. The 2 units of them they have remaining anyway, after the elves killed the other one. Plenty of units now moving through this little building area as well. Halberdiers still alive, some men-at-arms as well, so a late game phalanx certainly won't go amiss. Very depleted unit of crossbows, but still, I mean, this isn't going all that well for the elves. And maybe they should have considered spreading themselves out a little more, or just skirmishing with the enemy a little bit first, because they really have thrown an awful lot of their manpower under the bus, and any advantage they may have had may have evaporated with that. point-blank shots into the Guathlo tracks and then hearing out the archers. I mean, they're doing damage for sure, but the archers may have already done their thing. There goes the Cardolan general. The morale of the Cardolan units is something that is almost certain to suffer in the long run as a result of that. Maybe I'm not giving the defenders their due in this fight. I was thinking that perhaps they would be sort of a bit part player in this, really the obstacle that one of the other three would have to overcome in the long run, but I mean, it is possible they could outlast all of the attackers, but the attackers at some point will need to do more substantial damage to one another than the small skirmishes that we saw break out between Dol Amroth and Lothlorien if the defenders are to actually go on and win this, because so far they have been largely the target of everyone's affections. Lorinand Axemen making their way forward a little bit more bulky and survivable perhaps, and Lorinand archers getting in behind enemy lines, finally finishing off this incredibly depleted unit of sharpshooters. They will run for the hills. Lorinand archers are here. Some Barrow-wights are there. Dol Amroth may start to fire into the elven units that they perceive. Although over here we can see that the elves coming in from the side as well, some spears of the wood. Not going to do very well against the Doom 9 captains. Their damage isn't going to be enough to break through the melee defense, and the Doom 9 captain's damage in return, of course, against lightly armoured units like that is going to be far too good. Haven Knights charging in. Barrow-wights and Orc fellas taking damage. Yeah, that unit of Haven Knights could be really, really good in the late game. Thalon men-at-arms maybe entrapping the defenders now, at least a portion of their army. Elves are in behind enemy lines, but I don't know if these Lorinand archers are going to be up to the task of killing off all of these units of orcs. There's a lot of orc fellas, a lot of scourge raiders in there. Through sheer numbers, I think the Lorinand archers are going to start to struggle. They're already shaken, and now also with some scourge raiders. Although the scourge raiders immediately are going to come under fire from the Kindred of Calavorn. Not great under arrow fire, even with that armour upgrade. Excuse me, that they have. Apologies for that. Angmar halberdiers loitering around as well. The Hiriath archers may be thinking of attacking into the Thalon men-at-arms, so they really don't need to do that. Another charge in there. No real need for them to be involved in sustained melee against the Orc fellas. Haven Knights charging in. It is looking like the attackers are very keen on removing the defenders first before turning on one another, but that's always going to end up favouring one of the attackers, which the strongest among them probably won't mind at all. But the other two should maybe reconsider their options before that happens. This is finely balanced though, because it could still go either way depending upon the decisions that people make. Still, those Starbad Warhammers, that unit of Spears of the Wood, surely isn't going to last too much longer. Witcher and Blackguard are over there, so most of the Angmar forces, interesting enough, are putting themselves away in the corner over there, whereas Cardolan are going to try and remain within those buildings. Maybe splitting their assets in such a manner is more likely to bring the attackers into conflict with one another, just through the fact that space will be at more of a premium as the battle goes along. Barrow-wights slowly plodding their way back. That is the problem, you can't exactly be lightning fast with your changes in positioning when you're using the Barrow-wights, because they are incredibly slow, and it's our Roman gatekeepers being swamped and demolished by the elves now at long last. It will be interesting to see just how much ammunition the elves have in the late game, because if that's the case, I mean, Karen Amroth Rangers are there. If that's the case, Angmar putting themselves into the corner actually isn't really the strength that they may think it to be. While Dol Amroth going to try and finish off the Cardolan wing of the defenders. Ward Wanderers of Nimrodale, are they firing into Isengard? They might be. Urukai Crossman getting up on top of this little sand dune on the coast. Going to try and fire into the Angmar units. Smoke starts to rise from a lot of these buildings that were hit by artillery earlier on in proceedings. Caspar still has ammunition, which is kind of impressive in a way, but surely it's not too much ammunition left. Obviously, Dol Amroth losing their Caspar earlier on, real tragedy for them. The Isengard Ballista proving itself to be effective, and they're going after the Haven Knights. They see the damage that Dol Amroth cavalry could do in the late game, the problem and threat that it could pose to the more archer-focused elves. Elsewise, it does look as though Dol Amroth and Isengard have actually come to a bit of a mutual understanding. We shall work together for the time being, although, will they? Are they going to bump into one another? I mean, they're testing the limits of their alliance if they have come to an agreement. If I were Isengard, I would be very untrusting of Dol Amroth with the level of quality they have parked right near you. I mean, the Nazkai pose a threat to Dol Amroth, so they can't just go in there willy-nilly, but still. Barrow-wights are going to be eventually finished off by a combination of men-at-arms and halberdiers of a Thalon. And now what will the attackers do? Because if they tear 7 bells out of one another, Angmar's ploy to basically put themselves in the corner will actually work out quite nicely. There's still the small matter of Cardolan's units that are in here. Do they continue to focus on the defence? And if they do, who do they go after? Do they task Lothlorien with killing off Angmar while Dol Amroth and Isengard try to finish off Cardolan, and then to the victor go the spoils in the late game? Or do they try and turn their attentions at least partially on one another, which would be the only way for the defenders to be victorious in this situation, I would imagine. In many ways, the battle is out of the defenders' hands and always has been. It looks as though Lothlorien are in fact going to go after Angmar. A few arrows finding their way into the Angmar halberds. Over here, defeat seems certain. Only a military genius could win this battle. You don't say. Cardolan are not going to come out of their hiding place. I don't think Dol Amroth have actually got the strength to expel Cardolan from their hiding place either. Halberdiers are all well and good. The cavalry is useful in more open climbs, but not within that area. And Haven Knights going in, taking terrible vengeance upon Lothlorien for killing off the Dol Amroth catapult earlier. I mean, I can't imagine the Lorien catapult has actually got that much in the way of ammunition left, so it's probably not too much of a problem for them, but still, Dol Amroth just letting the elves know that they are in fact not friends in this situation. Lorien Axemen, will they move forward and attack into the Dol Amroth halberds? I would not do that if I were the elves. Being kept at arm's length is not to be considered a good thing. And those Lorien Axemen, far too few of them to really make the kind of impact they wanted to there. I mean, they're a decently high quality unit against Angmar halberds and orc fellas, but there's simply far too many of these foul orcs. I mean, it's very clear what Angmar and Cardolan are doing. They've given themselves the best possible chance of victory at this point. And they're under no... well, they really don't need to attack forward. Like, they are ultimately, like I said, the defenders. It is a free-for-all, and technically you could view it as they all started in quarters of the map, but it's very clear that the idea behind this fight was always to have the army of 2 be holding on to the city, and the 3 armies to try and take it over. Now we're in a bit of a weird situation. A situation where I think actually what we need to do is go up to ×2 speed. The catapult is still there, going after the Witchround pikemen, not getting too much damage done, but it's at least to let Angmar know that the elves still consider them the bigger threat. Lorien Axeman guarding themselves. You can see the makeshift alliance of Isengard and Dol Amroth, Lothlorien standing alone, and then of course the solid alliance of Angmar and Cardolan. And so the Mexican standoff begins. It's just a case of who blinks first, who is going to make the first move. Even if Angmar becomes the punching bag, it may allow Cardolan to counterattack later on and allow the defenders to pull out the victory. Nazkai loitering. Kindred of Celeborn waiting. Still have those Watchers of the Goldenwood as well, which is such a strong unit to have in melee late on. Lorinard warriors will be swallowed whole by that unit of Tirithea marksmen, and this catapult is now very exposed to this, but these few elves are getting in the way of these men of Dol Amroth. The catapult crew will engage, but the Tirithea marksmen will win this, and finally the elven catapult will be laid low. Dol Amroth will have their revenge in a fashion. As I said, not really equivalent, because Dol Amroth clearly had far more ammunition left to them, so the tragedy is greater for them. One Scourge Raider remains. He was set upon by all of those halberds. We are well, there's actually still one champion of the White Hand as well, which is rather interesting. We are entering the final phases at this point, and now heading ever closer towards the final 10,000 frames, and I'm still not sure who I'd back to win this, because so much of it depends upon what the players decide to do. I mean, the Haven Knights taking damage there at the hands of the Elven firing line. I do appreciate, however, the fact that Dol Amroth and Isengard have allied with one another, because I think they both realise that if they don't, they are in the weakest position of the factions that are on the field at this point. The Elves have got all of that range power still available to them, and Angmar and Cardolan will always have one another to rely upon. And they have, of course, all of those high-end units. Splitting themselves has also been a good move. So it is still very much in the balance. The Lorinard Axemen will finish off these Tirithea marksmen. That is in little doubt, I think. What else have we got going on? Nothing really. Wanderers of Nimrodel firing into the Angmarin defensive position. So at the very least, Dol Amroth don't have tunnel vision for the elves. Shooting into the front of the Witcher and Blackguard, I mean, the body piercing will still be useful, of course, but from the front, a multiple HP unit of shielded bodyguard infantry is going to be fairly difficult to kill off efficiently, but it might be more tempting for me to go after the pikemen even, because the Witcher and Blackguard will have their equal on the field. There's the Nazkai, there's the Elven elite infantry units that you can always rely upon to go toe-to-toe with the Blackguard, whereas the pikes could prove to be a little bit more of a problem for everyone involved now that Isengard's pike line has been made a thing of the past. Tirithea marksmen continuing to get set about by this unit of Axemen. And now Dol Amroth trying to cross the open field to engage with Angmar, but rather predictably, as soon as they do that, the Elven archers that are in position down the way are going to make it so that very few of these halberdiers ultimately make it to their destination, if they make it to their destination at all. Kindred of Celeborn ripping through the unshielded clutch of units there, but Dol Amroth making their move, making their play to attack Angmar, so they have been the one to make that first step. I mean, 2 units of halberdiers, they are going to be far superior to the initial line of Angmarim that are here. We'll go back down to 1 speed now. So Angmar's bluff has ultimately been called, someone has attacked into them. Will those halberds be enough? Scourge Raiders up on the high ground there. That's going to be a real problem for these halberdiers, and Dol Amroth may have put themselves in a situation that isn't exactly ideal. Glather and Blade Masters reveal themselves another worthwhile addition to consider. Still, all of those Cardolan units effectively hiding. I mean, I would assume they know they're there, because they'll be able to see on the minimap very clearly there will be a big blob of red near them. But they are pointing in the wrong direction. I mean, the good thing about the elves having such strong archer units is the fact that they're so good in melee that simply catching them unawares and attacking them isn't necessarily going to be enough to guarantee victory. What are we doing here? I would be very careful about this. Getting very close. I mean, Isengard will be rubbing their hands together at this point, because they've essentially convinced Dol Amroth to be their pawns, I think. Dol Amroth moving forward and softening up Angmar. Victory seems certain for Angmar, which is somewhat interesting. I think they've come to a sort of mutual understanding at this point that they need to try and dislodge Angmar from this hill that they are on, and the Keren Amroth Rangers are going to go after that unit of Witchround pikemen. If I were Angmar, though, I would still be content with this course of events as long as Cardolan was safe and that they were able to carry us through in the late game. That's a lot of damage though. Barrow Wight's also taking hits, trying to get in the way perhaps of the ammunition hitting the Blackguard. Still the Tiradea marksmen doing their best, but while the Orc fellas are a very basic unit of infantry, they at least have that armour piercing going for them. And for a unit of heavy archers that are out of ammo like the Tiradea marksmen, whose best feature in melee really is that high armour value they have. It's not the most efficient engagement, but Halberdiers starting to rout and break. Those Scourge Raiders definitely proving their worth there. Plenty of routing units in the background. Yeah, I think at this point it's fairly safe to assume that Dol Amroth are probably not going to win this battle. They may have paved the way for Isengard to do the business. Ooh, hello. Betrayal? I like this. They clearly came to some sort of understanding to go after Angmar, but Dol Amroth, perhaps in one last show of defiance, is going to charge into the elves and do damage to their Cardolan Rangers. I like that. You're not bound by anything in a free-for-all unless you are just on the same team, like Cardolan and Angmar are. And it's one of the best things, like more people should be willing to engage in these kind of ruthless betrayals. I wonder if Isengard are going to do that now as well. And they're willing to let the illusion stand for a little bit longer by the looks of things. So if the Nazkai get into melee with those Haven Knights, it's all over for them. Wanderers of Nimrodel caught out by the Lorien Axemen. Not a huge amount of room to charge, but the Haven Knights still manage it. They don't necessarily want to be just in pure melee with the Lorien Axemen, but they will at least be better at this sort of thing than the Knights of the Silver Swan were. It's fair to say. Have Cardolan revealed themselves? They have, maybe a little bit soon. Galathrun Blademaster standing in the way, but what remains of their pikes, Dunedain Captains, the Tharvad Warhammers, I mean, just 2 units of Galathrun Blademasters is not going to be enough to deal with this level of quality that this Cardolan counter-attack is bringing to the table. And come the Watchers of the Golden Wood, the Haven Knights just trying to do as much damage to the elves as they possibly can. There's Kindred of Caliborn in there as well. Of course, this is good news as well for Angmar, who shook off that Dol Amroth assault and are now the only faction, aside from Isengard perhaps, who is not in dedicated combat. Wanderers of Nimrodel are running. Was that due to the Lorien Axemen or due to the Nazkai and Uruk-hai pikemen, I wonder? And Isengard is still very wounded from their ill-fated assault earlier on. The time is getting closer though, where they will have to make some sort of play, otherwise someone is going to be significantly stronger than them in the late game. The problem is if they attack into this Elven position over here, there's simply too much quality for them. They can't attack uphill into that Angmar position. So I think even with the alliance of necessity they struck up with Dol Amroth, I'm not sure whether they're going to be able to dig themselves out of the hole they find themselves in. Tharvad Warhammers are shaken. For what purpose? Is this the legendary poor Cardolan morale coming into play? Because it is looking more and more like the elves are turning back the tide against Cardolan here. 56 Minhiriath archers rout. Bad news for the defenders, it must be said, but great news for the elves, as it is a continuing monument to their strength on the field today. Do they want to chase Cardolan down now into the cover of those buildings? No is probably the answer. Retreating back into their happy place. Tharvad Warhammers and Dunedain Captains still alive. Watchers of the Golden Wood shuffling their way forwards. So now, once again, I guess it's ×2 speed time, because it falls quiet once again. Everyone at this point is so wounded they don't want to be the ones to make the first move necessarily, because it could be disastrous for them. I don't know, are Dol Amroth completely gone at this point? No, they still have that 12 Haven Knights way over there, so they are still a factor in this battle. That's not going to be enough surely for them to go on to win. Someone, even if they are, other than one other faction, the last one standing, surely 12 Haven Knights isn't going to be enough to finish them off. The elves meanwhile attacking into Angmar. Guardians of Khan Dûn. Galathrun Blademasters as well. Haven Knights are on their way back. Surely there's very bad blood between Dol Amroth and Lothlorien in this fight. And Lorien are probably fancying their chances. I mean, Scourge Raiders are going to be pelting the Lorien-armed axemen with throwing axes. Enough to kill off a decent number of them. This front line, despite the fact that it's been made up mainly of very, very basic units, has done a very good job so far, but surely these Galathren Blade Masters are going to be too much for Orc Fellas and Angmar Halberds to deal with unless those Scourge Raiders still have a very significant amount of ammunition remaining to them. Still Isengard with those Nazkai. I mean, there's still over 100 bodyguard tier elven units left, which could prove to be a real problem. More Orc Fellas charging in. I mean, they will finish off this unit of Lorien-armed axemen for sure. And the Angmar Marauders now coming down here as well, 74 of them. Scourge Raiders out of ammunition, so they're joining melee. They're decent in melee, there's only 40 of them left though. Just trying to throw numbers at the problem here to finish off this bit of a token effort of an elven attack, to be honest, because they're purposefully not sending forward any of their quality units because they want to make sure that those are alive for later. But unlike when Dol Amroth attacked forward and the elves shot a bunch of kindred ammunition into them, the elves don't have to deal with such things. Isengard are not attacking into the rear of them. Cardolan are still within the cover of those buildings that they are posted up in. Pikemen are there. Barrow-wights. The Haven Knights lose their bottle there. They were going to charge into the Kindred. They should have followed through on that charge, I think. It's the best thing that they can really do at this point. Like I said, they're not really going to win the battle, but if they... Clearly, I think Lothlorien is the one they would rather not win the battle, so they need to do some damage here to the Elven Bodyguard units to give someone else the best chance of winning, be that the defenders or Isengard. Still with some ranger ammunition as well, which is concerning for everyone else involved. And they are able to get some decent shots here into the heart of these lighter Angmar units. Pikemen. Still have some decent units to quest up there. Now they're willing to move forward to maybe try and finish off Angmar, sending their Kindred of Caliborn into melee. This will surely be the sort of thing which starts to induce routing, or certainly at the very least a lot of killing in the ranks of the Orc fellas. Haven Knights on the periphery. Nandor. Watchers of the Golden have been committed forward. I mean, this is a big deal for the Elves to do, because they're pretty much sending all of their units in. They've left their Cardolan Amroth Rangers open for a charge from the Haven Knights. This is pretty much what Dol Amroth were waiting for, and surely they're not going to be able to get away now. They must have known this was happening. They saw the cavalry try to charge in previous to now. Could the Elves, in their haste to try and deal with Angmar, have thrown away their chances? I mean, the Haven Knights could make that so. Be exactly the sort of thing which Isengard and Cardolan were also waiting for. For Angmar, of course, the only thing they really need to do is continue to do as much damage as they can and hope that Cardolan can carry the victory for them. That line of Angmar has finally been dealt with. Small amount of Pikes, Barrow-wights and Blackguard, all that they have remaining. One halberdier that is currently routing. They're trying to take cover behind the catapults so that they don't get charged, but I mean, the champions of the White Hand are also nibbling at their heels. It's not going to work. Cavalry's going to catch up to them. I mean, even in pure melee at this point, the Haven Knights would have enough, I think, to kill the Cardolan Amroth Rangers. Melee cavalry such as they are, and there's still 13 of them remaining. Charging is, of course, the most efficient way of doing things. Are they going to charge in? So far, just marching, going through the catapult. I mean, this is a good idea from Diego. It's to try and give them the runaround around the catapults to try and buy time. Ultimately, it is going to be in vain, but it's working to a certain extent. And now the Uruk-hai crossbows firing in to the backs of Lothlorien. And again, this may be one of those situations where clearly the Elves were in a position of strength going into the final phases, but that actually may prove to be their undoing here, as the other factions are in play are very keen on bringing them down, and they're not going to have the pure martial might to kill everyone else off in melee. They may very well manage it here with Angmar, but they won't then manage it with both Isengard and Cardolan afterwards. Isengard are moving forward. I mean, there's still Dol Amroth as well, I suppose, but if the battle is going to take place in environments such as this, the Haven Knights won't be the sort of thing that you need to win you the battle. Still with ammunition. Still this alliance of circumstance between Isengard and Dol Amroth holds. Eventually that will have to be broken, whether through one of them being destroyed or them having to turn on one another. How tragic. Cardolan Amroth Rangers going to shoot into Angmar at point blank. They see what's going on though, and the Witchhound Blackguard will move to close the gap. But they will be blocked by the Watchers of the Golden Wood, and the Watchers of the Golden Wood, of the two units here, will be the superior melee combatants. What is Cardolan doing, I wonder? Cardolan arriving on the scene. Hiriath archers will get charged, probably rout as a direct result of that, but it will also mean that, well, there goes Haldir. The Lothlorien general is next to fall. They were in melee for a little bit there with the Dunedain captains, but still, the survivability of the Haven Knights very much on display here, because they've been involved in some dicey situations and still they live. Snaga skirmishers getting introduced to the Tharbad Warhammers, and they rout as a result, so a unit may be trying to be sequestered away and saved for later. Ultimately, not going to be happening. Dunlending clansman going up against some Hiriath archers, and then also the Dunedain captains over here who are going to deal with the Uruk-hai crossbows, so no longer will Isengard be avoiding any kind of fighting. Whatever happened to the Nazkai? Uruk-hai pikemen, I guess they're going up there, so we're going to see a three-way battle for the summit of this hill. In incredible scenes. The Witchhound Blackguard, I mean, the Elves were going to win up here regardless. The Barrow Wights are here. There goes Imrahil at long last, which is surely a sign that Dol Amroth stays unnumbered. I mean, with Isengard attacking up here, the Elves will take a lot of damage. Cardolan Amroth Rangers are still there. The Watchers of the Golden and the Kindred of Caliban may still be enough to finish off what remains of the Barrow Wights, the Pikes, and the Nazkai. Nazkai with not too many remaining. If the Elves win, it will be as a result of the kind of unit Tetris that has been being played falling in their favour, which would be interesting. Cardolan trying to shuffle to the aid, I think, of their allies. Dunlending clansmen are routing. There's still one champion of the White Hand. I mean, there's still Haven Knights on the field, still 8 of them. As I said, this kind of fight is likely not going to be the sort of thing which Dol Amroth can salvage victory from this battle from. I mean, Tharbad Warhammers are going to get charged. This is the sort of thing which may put the kibosh on any hopes the defenders had of victory. I mean, surely the Haven Knights at this point. That guy, surely he's doomed. No, manages to just about wriggle free, but more of the Haven Knights there. You can see the difference that charging into a unit like that Tharbad Warhammers has on a tanky unit like the Haven Knights. Cardolan Amroth Rangers finally being chopped down by the Dunedain captains. Meanwhile, over here, looks like the Elves. A general has fallen, that's Angmar's general. There's not really much of Angmar left alive, and the Barrow Wights will continue to fight indefinitely, regardless of what's happening there. I think the defenders may actually go on to win this based on what is remaining. Although I don't know, they may just be... Tharbad Warhammers here might just be bailing the Elves out by attacking into the rear of these Uruk-hai pikemen and essentially ending all of Isengard's hopes of winning. Barrow Wights, oh, he's admitted defeat. DF Mark admitting defeat. And Longchom admitting defeat. Why? For what purpose? They could still have won that fight. I don't understand. We're doing that. I mean, I think the Watchers of the Golden Wood and the Kindred of Caliban would have been enough, but with that amount of units, I think they still would have been... I don't know, honestly. If they'd allowed the Isengard Pikes to rack up a couple more kills, it almost would have been a guaranteed victory for Cardolan and Angmar. I'm completely bemused by that. It's a somewhat disappointing ending to that, to be honest with you. I mean, the Elves win, I guess. Because there's no way that those Haven Knights are going to be enough. And I think that the Dol Amroth player is probably going to admit defeat anyway. And the elves, to be fair, throughout the entire fight played exactly as they should have. Sometimes the circumstance of a free-for-all can be the difference maker. And their strength going into the final phases, it looked like for a while that was going to be their undoing, but in the end, due to a very bizarre admittal of defeat from Angmar and Cardolan, Lothlorien are going to be victorious. And that's going to be that. What a thoroughly bizarre battle that was. But I guess well played to Diego. He didn't really do all that much wrong. And yeah, he's a worthy victor of this very strangely structured free-for-all on a map that we've never seen before, which is something of a rarity. Like I said, this map I think is designed for free-for-alls, mainly because the city is so large that you can't really defend it effectively either from the outer walls or in the interior if it was intended for such things. But even so, it's neat to see as a kind of arena, if you will. It's almost like a team deathmatch map in a first-person shooter, almost, the way that this is set up, in the sense that it doesn't really look like how a city should. It looks like it's been designed more as an arena than anything else, but still, it's an interesting one nonetheless. Big thank you to the Wound Raider for sending this one in, and a big thank you to all of the players for being a part of this battle replay. Let's see what did the damage for Isengard. I would imagine the Ballista racked up a good amount of kills, 253 indeed. Champions of the White Hand, also Cavalry. We didn't really see them in action so much as we saw the Haven Knights, but they still did very well in the moments that we didn't see them. But most of what Isengard did kills-wise happened in the first wave of assault, really. They didn't really play any part in the midsection of the battle because they couldn't. They had already taken so much damage at the hands of Angmar and Cardolan when that was going on, and then they got back involved in the late game, but they still didn't have enough really to impress themselves on the battle as much as they could. But clearly they were using Dol Amroth as their sort of pawns in battle, as it were. It would have been really interesting if Isengard and Dol Amroth as an alliance had killed the other factions off, and then Isengard had to brutally betray their allies, but we never really saw that pan out. Pikemen did okay in parts. Snaga skirmishers, about as well as you could expect. Urukai crossbowmen, again, all breaking the 100 kills mark. Nazkai in the late game as well, proving themselves as a very dangerous unit once again. And yeah, very mixed bag for Isengard overall, but still plenty of kills, but that's to be expected when you're attacking into Angmar and Cardolan first, and they have by far the most units on the field. But Cardolan actually with the most kills overall of anyone, which is kind of interesting to see as well. So yeah, that was an interesting free-for-all. Like I said, we haven't had any of these sort of lopsided free-for-alls in quite a while, and now we've had two in the space of around 2 weeks by the time these come out, I think. So yeah, very interesting. As for what's coming up next, I'm not sure, because this is actually the last replay that I'm recording before I go home before Christmas. So I'm recording these in sort of mid-December, as it were. By the time I get back, depending on what I've been sent, will then make up my mind about whether I'm going to be doing the battle that follows this will be another Reforged one, maybe a Silmarillion one, maybe something else. The one thing that I will be recording when I get back is the top 5 spear infantry from Rise of Mordor. So that will probably be coming out in the next week and a half or so after this replay at some point, so that will be something to record when I get back. But yeah, other than that, I'm not really so sure. But yeah, it is what it is, I suppose. Big thank you to Wound Raider and all of the players once again for this battle replay. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.